Do you know the reasoning behind not being able to screw things in trees, not being able to trim really anything in your hunting location?
Yeah, it definitely predates me. And to my understanding, so much of like government regulation is that it's easier to prohibit something than to like sort of easily define what it is, right? Um, so I think there's a lot of discretion. So when you talk about screwing things into a tree, um, I think some of the intent of that is that hunters don't forget, and I think we've probably all done it. We've all put like some sort of hook in our tree to hang our bow or something, and then you climb down and then you just kind of forget about it. And what happens is, if you forget about it long enough, the tree continues to grow and it sucks that thing in. I think a lot of that probably comes from, especially on our certainly game areas, and as you get into like some of the state forest areas, those are all managed, and there's different cuttings that are involved. So if you forget one of those hooks and it kind of gets buried, you have the potential for a logger to go through and cut into a piece of metal that's buried into a tree somewhere. And, nobody wants to really experience that. Um, I think there's parts of that are involved from the trimming standpoint. My understanding is that's very much a discretional piece. I think going up and just sort of clipping a few branches here and there to give to clear a little space or to clear one spot is probably viewed as acceptable, even though it's written as illegal. I think what that's there to protect is a massive effort to cut down like lanes, especially from like a ground blind where you're taking a bunch of
Correct. Yeah.
seedlings and saplings out of the potential understory to take a deer. And a lot of forestry management practices might be dependent on some of those seedlings eventually turning into overstory trees. So it's like a gradient that occurs. So I think it's probably written to be more restrictive, and it's probably interpreted along a gradient from each individual officer, but it's written as much more restrictive.
Yeah, and I think that's the tough part is because guys, you see this out there, like they don't want to touch anything
Yep.
because they don't know the DNR officer that they may encounter, which they probably won't, but may encounter how they would interpret that law and write them a citation, do whatever, right? And so there's this hands off kind of like I can't trim anything. What are the chances of those changing? Because in my mind and from hunters' perspectives, I think some of these are ridiculous regulations, right? If I'm out bow hunting and trying to use public lands, which I co-own, I guess you could look at as a resident of the state, and I've got this little twig in my way and I can't trim it. What are the chances of having more, like you said, hunter friendly regulations in, like you can trim things like this but not like that, that would allow some leeway there?
Yeah, I mean, I gave you a one on the first one. I'll give you a 9 or 10 on this one. This topic, to be honest with you, doesn't really come up, at least in my world. But maybe there's a lot more discussion happening on this topic outside, and it's just not simply communicated up, at least to the department level or certainly the biologist level.
Okay.
I think there would be absolutely a willingness to review some of those things, and especially if there was some sort of guidance provided, or like, these are the things that, just to provide a little bit more clarity in what can and can't be done rather than this sort of broad brushstroke. I think that's something that, there would be a lot of receptivity to that. And certainly there would be some other voices that would be weighed in. And I can't vouch for who those voices are or what those voices would say. But to my knowledge, I think this is one of those regulations that probably was set a long time ago and largely forgotten. So you don't really hear a whole lot about it now, but there might be an opportunity to revisit and potentially redefine some of that language to make it a little bit more, opportunistic for hunters. And honestly, I think one of the arguments that probably could be made is, us as a state have been talking about ways to manage deer, try to, in many cases, reduce deer numbers. And here's an opportunity where someone can say, listen, like, give us a better opportunity by just being able to trim a couple branches so we can
Right.
get an arrow to our deer without having it plink off several different branches, or open up some more opportunity for some kill sites, because just because there's a deer trail there doesn't mean that the deer is going to go exactly at that location. It might kind of circle around. So just give us a little bit more opportunity to be successful. And if it's just a simple matter of pruning a couple branches here and there makes the difference between taking a deer or two out, then I think that's something that is well worth the investment.